Here we are at the 2016 February Pasadena Book Fair, sponsored by the Southern California chapter of ABAA. And our next interview is with Bruce Barnett, who is the book block. And Bruce, well, I can ask everybody, give us a little background on your family, siblings, your education, what your parents did, et cetera, education-wise. Bring a little mini bio.
Okay. I was the second of two children to my parents, Nathan and Rita. Nathan was a contractor, so I learned how to do all kinds of things. I, to this day, can still turn a mean screwdriver.
Oh, great.
My mother was a bookkeeper. My older brother, Gilbert, he's Gilbert George, I'm Bruce Howard. My father was English. We wouldn't forget that.
No.
Gil today, well, Gil has two children and today is a CPA, and like me, he now lives in Florida. Education-wise, I went to school in New York, went to college in Connecticut, went to law school in New York, MBA in New York, wound up teaching in an MBA program.
What's the timeline on this?
Years, you're talking
Yeah,
about the
exactly.
years? Okay, so 64 was a high school graduation, 68 college, 71 law school, advanced law degree in 73, and then MBA studies after that.
So where are we now, 73, 74?
Well, should we talk about employment?
Yeah.
When I finished law school, I went to work for an accounting firm because I thought it was important to know something about accounting. And then I went back to school and got a master's of law and taxation. I became a tax lawyer. As a kid, this is maybe more germane, although you tell me if I'm off base. As a kid, I was very close with my uncle Bob, whose name is Robert Koch. Robert was an art historian. He taught all over the country, and he developed his own private library because at that time, no internet. We're talking now in the 50s.
Yeah.
No internet, and I think he got tired of traveling to libraries and universities to do research. So he built his own library, and he had a fabulous library which included all kinds of rare materials, and it was so good that he had scholars from Europe coming to do research in his library.
Wow.
And he and I were quite close, and he introduced me to the world of art. So I learned everything I know about art from him, and I also learned through his library about books. And one of the things that I found very valuable was that I could acquire my own collection of art by buying books inexpensively. Mm-hmm. So I started out with illustrated books. As a teenager, I was collecting illustrated books. That developed into a collection of poster art, and I, to this day, have a nice collection of posters. It also drew me into the world of book collecting. So that's how I got started as a teenager, collecting illustrated books, and over time, I expanded into other areas, particularly things like Sherlock Holmes, a huge fan of Sherlock Holmes. So I was doing that kind of thing. But I wasn't earning a living with books. I was earning a living as a lawyer and in finance. My main supplier over time became David Block. I was working in Greenwich, Connecticut. David at that time had a shop in Greenwich, Connecticut, and I used to wander into David's shop and introduce myself. I'd look around the bookshelves, and he and I struck an arrangement. I'd give him legal advice and do some work for him in exchange for books. And that's how we started. We became friendly, and I met his wife, Shumeen, and David and I spent a lot of time in Shumeen's kitchen. She's a fabulous cook.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so she would make us lunch, and we would chat about books, and we'd chat about law and taxes and things like that. And David provided me with most of my books in those days, and we talked about one day becoming partners. And that's how I got into the business of trading in books. David was looking forward to, or looking ahead to the day when he would retire, and he sensibly thought about somebody who could continue that business, take over his inventory, and that would be me. And for me, it was easy entree.
Yeah.
So I had my own collection of books, but David had his stock, and that formed the basis for our combined inventory.
When did that, what was the timeline?
So that would have been what David and I probably started doing things together maybe 15 years ago. And I don't recall exactly when he retired, maybe 2008?
I thought it was like 5 or 6 years ago, but
Well, David he stayed with me as kind of
Yeah.
consultant. But in terms of active book selling, I think he represented one large client for a
Yeah.
long time. But he stopped coming to fairs other than as a scout, probably 2007, 8.
I haven't seen him around lately.
Yeah, he's fully retired now, playing golf and having fun, enjoying his grandkids in Virginia.
Good for him.
Yeah, good for him, yeah.
So when did you actually take over the business?
Let's see, I probably took over the business in about less than 10 years ago.
Okay, let me ask you the next question is, how did you translate into the internet? Were you internet capable, or did you have to go through the struggles that most booksellers go through?
I probably was a little advanced, not because I'm particularly technical or knowledgeable, but because I had experience from my previous life.
Yeah, yeah.
So I did not have to start from ground zero. I had enough experience that I was able to pick up probably faster than most booksellers, maybe not faster than the general population, because as a group, we're not that smart.
Yeah, well, and of course, the best people who could teach you about computers are usually 11 or 12 years old.
That's right.
And they don't charge.
Have you seen that commercial on TV?
No, which one?
There's a grandma and grandpa come rushing out of their front door because the grandchildren are visiting. And it's a boy and a girl, and the kids reach out to hug their grandparents, and the grandparents say, "Oh, we're so happy to see you," and the grandmother hands a computer to the granddaughter, and the grandfather hands a phone to the grandson. "We need some help." That's a great commercial.
Yeah, it is, and it's so true. Let me ask you something about business. What percentage of your business do you do? You have an open shop?
No.
Okay. What do you issue catalogs?
Very infrequently now.
So what would you say, most of your business is done through quotations and that kind of thing?
No,
or?
most of our business is done through what I'll call a client list.
Okay.
So most of our business is done with institutions. So we visit the universities and museums, and that's how we do business. They contact us sometimes, and more often we contact them, and that's the bulk of our business. We're on the internet because it's 2016 and we feel an obligation to be on the internet, and we do some business on it, but it's a small percentage of our business.
I see. And you've never issued any catalogs?
Yeah, we have.
Oh, you have?
Yeah.
But the amount of business is minuscule and compared to what else you do? Or?
Yeah. Minuscule may be a bit of an
Well,
overstatement, but
yeah,
small.
well, you know where
Yeah.
I'm going.
Yeah.
How many book fairs do you do on an annual basis?
Typically, we do New York, California, and we do St. Petersburg, Florida.
Which is coming up in March.
March, yeah. And we used to do St. Petersburg, Florida, because my parents live there. and it was convenient. It was never been a great fair for us, but
Yeah.
to visit my parents, it was worth it. Parents are gone now, and now we still do it because now we visit friends.
Well, I've never done it, but I go to it frequently, and I find it an interesting place, if nothing
Yeah,
else.
the venue is fabulous.
Yeah.
And every so often, we actually do very well at that fair. It's not often, but from
Yeah.
time to time.
From time to time,
Yeah.
it's always
Well,
good.
we've had situations where a hedge fund guy will walk in and they'll say, "Oh, I like that," and walk away with a bunch of things. And so but it's very sporadic. Our typical year is not a very successful fair.
Tell me about the balance of your inventory in the sense of what subject matter do you specialize in, if so, if you do?
Well, we do, I like to say we do everything other than modern firsts. And we don't do modern firsts because I don't know the market at all. I can't seem to figure it out, and I don't want to spend the time trying.
I know what you're saying.
Yeah, but we still do a lot of Dance of Death, which was one of David's
Yeah.
interests. We still do a lot of that. We do a lot of illustrated books, a lot of private press. Yeah, as I say, everything other than modern firsts. We have a fair amount of 16th century, 17th century. We do a lot of early material. We do calligraphy, well, across the board.
Yeah. What do you see as some of the great challenges that we're going to face as booksellers in the next 5 to 10 years?
The trajectory seems to be dismal.
Yeah.
On the other hand, when I was at the dinner the other night, the reception for booksellers, I was actually taken by the number of young dealers who have joined the organization. I was surprised.
I never cease to be amazed by that.
Yeah, pleasantly surprised. And that suggests they know more than I do, for sure, because they wouldn't be going into it if they saw no future in it. I wouldn't think.
Well, you just don't know, Bruce, because there are a lot of young people who have this idealistic view of the book business as sitting on a big leather-covered chair in front of a fireplace, drinking brandy, and talking with their customers about the issues of the world.
Well, that's my business.
That's your business. You're the only one who does it. Nobody else can get that hot. But there is a romantic look at our business from time to
Yes.
time, which I think is justified.
Well, that's true. On the other hand, I just read an article that young people who have grown up with nothing but technology find books charming.
Yeah.
And they're kind of like artifacts, and they're coming back to books.
Well, that would be great.
That would be great.
Who are some of the, besides David, who are some of the other booksellers who sort of mentored you or you looked up to for advice or that kind of thing?
Well, actually, David was the only one.
It was enough for you.
Yes, David was enough for me, but he had enough experience. He'd been around enough. He's a good bookman. He knows his stuff, and I had the advantage of being mentored by my uncle. My uncle, who was so knowledgeable in so many areas. He authored a bunch of books.
What was his name again?
Robert Koch.
Koch. It's K-O-C-H?
K-O-C-H. He's if you have any experience with Louis Comfort Tiffany, he was the first Tiffany scholar and helped bring about the revival of Tiffany glass.
I know what Tiffany glass is, but that's about it.
Yeah. Well, I grew up with him and with Louis Tiffany, and his wife was an antique dealer. She dealt in turn of the 20th century material, a lot of Tiffany, and I spent a lot of time doing antique fairs. I spent a lot of time at the 7th Regiment Armory.
Yeah.
Not just books, but antiques.
Antiques, yeah.
So I learned the antique business quite well. My wife and I were actually partners in an antique shop in the 70s in Connecticut.
Where in Connecticut?
Norwalk.
In Norwalk.
Yeah. We worked it on the weekends, because I had a full-time job, and our partners worked it during the week. It didn't last too long because it was too much, but that also was good experience and training, and dealing with customers. And
After you became the heir apparent, as it were, for the book blog, when did you decide to come to Florida?
oh, we came to Florida only because our children moved from Chicago. So our daughter had moved to Florida. She had kids, 2 kids, and once the grandchildren showed up, we kind of forgot our daughter's name, but we remembered the grandkids, and so we were eager to be close to them. Our son lives in New York City, and he too has a child in New York City. So we decided it'd be nice to be near one of them, and our choice was New York versus Florida, and we wound up in Florida.
Well, I think the weather's a lot better than New York.
It is in the wintertime.
Well, in the summertime, it's not that great.
Summer's not so great in New York City either, but
No, but you've got some big buildings you can hide behind.
Yeah.
You can't do
Yeah.
that.
frankly, we're not crazy about Florida.
You're not.
No. Well, we came from Lake Forest, Illinois, before that.
Yeah, nice
Which
area.
we really liked, and we were sad to leave it. Chicago's a great town.
You went with the kids.
We went where the kids were. Yeah, so it's nice. We get to go watch a soccer game or a
That's all
grandson's
I do is
playing.
watch stuff.
Yeah, dance performance, That's why we're there.
Gymnastics, soccer,
There you go.
football, baseball,
Yeah,
basketball,
right.
you name it. And
But
there's
what's
something
better
to-
than that?
Nothing.
I get to play chess with my 10-year-old grandson.
Does he beat you?
I never let him beat me.
Oh, you don't? Good.
No,
you
never.
you play him tight.
Yeah.
And
He
he'll be-
beats my daughter now.
Oh, he does?
Yeah, he's a pretty good player. He's in tournaments, so he's doing well.
Oh, good for him.
Yeah,
Good for
yeah.
him.
So that, I wouldn't get to do that if I was still in Lake Forest.
No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't. And the weather, like you said, is like 10 months out of the year is probably much better than any place else around.
I don't know about 10 months, but for a number of months it is, yeah.
My secretary lives in Delray, and she
Oh,
lives
that's a great town.
She lives 6 months in Delray and 6 months in Winthrop, Massachusetts. And she loves the difference. She spends her winters where it's warm, and she spends her summers where it's warm.
Delray has exploded.
Oh, tell me about it. There's some wonderful restaurants on,
Yeah.
I can't remember some of the names, but one of them begins with a T, Travelino, on,
There's so
on
many now.
Atlantic Boulevard.
I don't know it, but there's so many.
It's right near the railroad tracks that go
Oh,
across.
yeah.
You know that.
Muscle
area.
Beach is there.
Yeah. And the Elvis impersonator every Thursday night.
Yeah, right.
So that's pretty funny anyhow. If you were entering the book trade today, would you?
No.
Explain.
You talked earlier about the romanticism associated with bookselling. I had a bit of that, but I wasn't coming to it cold because I had enough experience before that to understand it would not be that. I also knew I did not want an open bookstore.
Yeah.
What I hadn't anticipated was the decline in interest in books. I imagined a trajectory where books remained important to everybody in everyday life. It hasn't worked out that way. There's less interest than there had been, and that's not, I didn't anticipate that.
Well, none of us did.
Right. So with the knowledge I have today, I would not enter. I thought about a second life after practicing law. And that second life turned out to be books, but it could have been a lot of things. I'm interested in a lot of different things.
Renaissance man.
I don't know about that, but I have a number of interests. But anyway, I was drawn to books because I've always been drawn to books. Knowing what I know today, I'm not sure I would have gone in that direction. By the way, I do a lot of appraisals.
Yeah, I do too.
And that's one area that I absolutely love doing. Lots of people don't, because
I think it's a broadening of one's knowledge.
Absolutely.
Every time you do an appraisal, you've learned something that you didn't know anything about.
Exactly. It's the intellectual stimulation of
Absolutely.
appraisal that brings me to it and makes me enjoy it. So that I much prefer that to buying and selling books.
Well, my thing is buying. I enjoy the hunt.
Yeah,
Everything after that's a pain in the butt.
Well, anyway, I do like the appraisal side a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm fortunate that I get to do a lot of it. So that's fun.
Did you do that kind of thing when you were in Greenwich?
No.
But once you got to Florida?
No, well, in Lake Forest, I was doing a lot of appraisals.
Oh, you did up there too?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and many of my Midwest connections are, kind of wilting with
Well,
time.
yeah.
Time and distance tends to do that. And so
death.
we're farther away. But I used to do a lot in the Midwest, and I'm not as conveniently located anymore for local institutions. I worked with a lot of colleges, and they're looking for somebody local who can.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm not doing as many as I used to, but I suspect that'll pick up.
Well, yeah. It will as clients and customers go to the big bookstore in the sky. People need to know what to do with their books.
Yep.
And if the original owner was smart enough, he would have told one of his children or his wife, this is what I think it's worth. But they often don't. And then some poor widow has to call one of us to come and tell her what he actually has.
Incidentally, I do chat with my individual clients about that. And I do tell them that their kids are very unlikely to be interested in what they're interested in, and they at least ought to consider how they're going to dispose of their collections.
Right. Some of them like to give them away and take a tax write-off.
Yeah.
But,
Just perfectly sensible in some cases.
and then there are others whose children have continued the collection.
Yeah, not in my experience, not many.
Well, in Americana, it's a little bit different, but I have several customers who are continuing to build their parents' collection, even though their parents aren't there anymore.
That's great.
Which I think is pretty nice myself.
Yeah.
We're living in a kind of a strange world in the sense, with all the electronics that are going on and all the, junk that's happening all around us. I often wonder, is there a future in the book business? I mean, are we going to be a business that goes on and on and on, or are we going to be a business that gradually gets exterminated?
And you're asking me my view.
Right. What do you think?
My view is books increasingly will become artifacts, important for not their content, because the content's available online
Right.
or elsewhere, but as a representative of an earlier time.
A physical object,
Yes.
as it were.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, in other words, what you're saying is that don't get too crazy about stuff because it's going to be a physical object someday.
Yeah, though the iconography and the graphics and the illustrations, those will, I assume, continue to attract.
Well, a lot of young people who collect are interested in visual things. I have a lawyer friend who has a huge framed mat of where he was born and the area around it, and he points a point and says, that's where my house used to be. And then, there's all kinds of other visual things. And I've often wondered, is there a big forgery situation going on with prints and paintings?
Well, we know there is with paintings,
Yeah.
not so much with prints.
Prints, yeah.
But we know paintings are a major problem. Every museum in the world has forgeries hanging on their walls. We know that.
Yeah, which is...
But not in the book world.
No.
It's too expensive to make a book, to make a forgery.